I'm going to take you through a presentation and a bit of a demonstration on a rise of the device. Please feel free to ask questions if you could do that through the chat functionality of the GoToMeeting. That would be great, and then we'll look at those questions and answer those at the end. So I'm actually going to start this demonstration with a little bit of quite a bold statement, really, in that at Sense we believe the time has come to take a people-centric approach rather than a device-centric view of IT. And now a bit of background behind that is if we think of 10 to 15 years ago, predominantly each user had a single desktop which had a single operating system, and that was probably a Windows operating system, and they had local applications installed on there. Now, if I asked everybody on this call how many devices that they have access to at the moment, we'd probably see someone having maybe a desktop or a laptop. They've probably got their own mobile phone, but they've also got a tablet device as well. But also people may access a desktop on a server-based computing desktop, maybe a Citrix desktop, maybe a virtual desktop. And it's not just a single operating system anymore. We've obviously got the server OSs, we've got the different types of operating systems, so it could be Windows XP, could be moving to Windows 7, could be a 2008 R2 server desktop as well. And it's not just local applications anymore. We could have streamed applications, we could have published applications, and as I pointed out, it's not just the Windows operating systems. People could be accessing their applications now on the Mac OS. They could also be accessing it on an iOS device or an Android device. So this is where a people-centric approach becomes really important. Let's manage the person, manage the user, and not manage each device they have access to. Now I'm going to state the obvious here. People use devices daily to access their applications and their data, just to do their jobs. The devices access the apps, the applications communicate with the data, and the users have their own data stored in their My Documents. And also we have profiles which are made up of the user's data. And essentially, everything breaks down into ones and zeros. Now at AppSense, we want to give IT the ability to apply a policy across these varying and growing number of devices to the applications and to the data that the users and these applications access, but at the same time providing choice to the user without compromising security and flexibility. Now, if we reiterate the complexity of today, years ago we had a single desktop where we were concerned of managing the user's policy and personalization. We then introduced more of the mobile devices where security and context became an issue as well. And also when we started to deliver a server-based desktop, application compatibility and scalability became an issue. We're now seeing a lot of our customers that are going through a migration, obviously with the end of life of Windows XP. And now the migration and the app compatibility and again scalability is also an issue. And we see here that these problems are very much siloed, are very platform specific. And then at the end we now throw in these mobile devices, iOS and Android devices, and also the Apple operating systems. And this is where the complexity starts to ramp up considerably. Now there are a myriad of point solutions out there, but again these are all very much siloed and are platform specific, and they're all expensive approaches to take. The AppSense approach is to have a single platform for user policy and experience across these devices, applications and data. So we're managing a policy, maintaining the user experience, and rather than managing them in a more of a vertical siloed approach, we're taking this as a horizontal approach. Let's manage the user's devices, manage their applications and manage their data, applying a policy whilst maintaining a high level of user experience. Now, how do we do this at AppSense? Well, we have 3 products which I'm going to give you a demonstration of shortly. We've got Desktop Now, we have Data Now, and we have Mobile Now. And this is all about managing the user's access to devices, applications and data whilst maintaining policy and a level of user experience. Desktop Now focusing on a number of things such as logon optimization, profile management and privilege management. Data Now is all about anywhere data access from any device, fine-grained policy and keeping your data in their existing location. So no need for you to migrate your data from where it sits at the moment. Mobile Now is all about mobile device management and mobile application management, so at a much more granular level. Again, fine-grained policy, both on the application level and the device level, and rapid over-the-air SaaS-based technology. So let's jump into a demonstration. First of all, I'm going to focus on the user experience, looking at logon speeds and consistency of users' personalization. If I log on to a desktop as a user, I'm going to log on here as my accountant. If we think of typical things that would affect the user experience during the logon process, we think of complex logon scripts, group policies, and roaming profiles that slow down that logon. You'll see with an AppSense managed user, the logon experience is quick, but not only quick, it's actually a consistently quick logon experience. So we typically see that our customers are getting sub 20-second logons, not just at the first time that they've introduced AppSense, but consistently. So we get that high level of quality of service. When we think of users' personalization, we start to think of what the user's personal settings for their applications and their desktop. So I'm going to make some changes here as my user, maybe modifying, moving some of my toolbars around, changing the window size of an app, maybe going into my Microsoft Word application here, and personalizing it so I'm more productive. So changing the settings within the quick access toolbars. Maybe I'm not happy with the blue background, so I'm changing it to black. And I'm going to select a custom dictionary at random. So there we go, I've selected French West Indies for that custom dictionary. So these changes that I've just made to those two applications were very much conscious changes to my environment. But there's also changes that are happening to applications in the background that the user might not necessarily be aware of. So Outlook is a great example, and if you think of your NK2 files, your NK2 files are basically when you start to type an email to somebody that you've typed an email to in the past, Outlook gives you a suggestion of who you want to send that to. So you've sent one to tom.skase@appsense.com. The next time you start typing TOM, it gives you a list of all the Toms that you sent an email to. So that's personalization that's going to be very individual to that user and very different to any other user in the organization. And it's not just application personalization either. There's also personalization that the user makes to the operating system. So maybe the user has changed their mouse to a left-handed mouse, they've changed their accessibility options because they've got poor visibility. And it's these elements that we want to capture and persist in that user's environment to give that user a high level of user experience. If we think of the challenges that the user faces or IT face in persisting that user personalization, immediately we've hit a stumbling block in the fact that this is all done on a Windows XP desktop. Because a lot of our customers, as I mentioned before, are going through a migration process, but just migrating that user from Windows XP to Windows 7 or to a terminal server desktop, maybe 2008 R2 or even 2012, the elements of that user are very much locked into this operating system, very much locked into the local applications. So even just enabling a roaming profile will not capture this user's personalization because it's a version 1 profile in Windows XP and Windows XP and Windows 2003, and in the newer operating systems, Windows 7, Windows 8 and 2008 R2, etc., we have a version 2 profile. So even then there'd be an inconsistency by just enabling roaming profiles. But then we also start to think of the other methods of delivering a desktop and delivering the applications. It's not just local applications anymore. We have applications which are being published via Citrix, applications which are being delivered via AppV streaming technology. It makes it all very complex when delivering the user's desktop, never mind keeping that user experience consistent across all these different platforms and delivery mechanisms. At AppSense, we take a different approach to how we manage the user. Instead of actually capturing that user's personalization as a large, bloated chunk like a roaming profile does, first of all, we allow IT to identify the business critical applications that you want your users to be able to personalize. We identify those simply by understanding what the executable name is. So we don't have a supported whitelist or a supported whitelist of applications. We can simply identify the application just by its process name, and we can capture the personalization for the app. So immediately there we've trimmed out a lot of the bloat, made that user's profile much smaller. But the second thing that we do differently is we don't load everything at logon and then save everything at log off. We actually apply the user's personalization on demand. To demonstrate this, I'm going to log my user onto a second desktop. And this second desktop isn't another Windows XP desktop. It's actually not even another desktop operating system. I'm logging my user onto a 2008 R2 server desktop. You'll still see there that the user logon experience is nice and quick. So the user has access to their desktop in sub 20, sub 30 seconds. But not only that, the desktop looks and feels very familiar, because AppSense has applied a policy to that 2008 R2 server desktop, so it looks like another a desktop that the user is familiar with. Not only that, if I start to launch those applications that my user has personalized in the concurrent session, so you see that my user never logged off the XP desktop, another local version of Adobe Reader, that user's personalization has persisted across. So without the user logging off the desktop, the changes the user made to that Adobe Reader application on the XP machine has come across to a 2008 R2 server desktop, which is a 64-bit operating system rather than a 32-bit, and more importantly, a version 2 profile rather than a version 1. And that's just local to local profile, local to local applications. But as I mentioned before, we also have different delivery mechanisms for delivering the apps. So here we can see that my application, just to show you what the Word application looked like previously, it's black background, it's got the the custom dictionary which I selected at random, which was French West Indies. Closing the application down is when we capture the personalization. We're doing this on demand, we're capturing those changes the user has made whilst the application's been open and saving those changes when the application closes. We're storing those changes centrally in our personalization server. The great benefits of that is now we've decoupled that user element, unlocking the user from the operating system, unlocking the user from the application delivery mechanism that was used to deliver the app. So now IT are free to deliver that application, free to deliver a different operating system, however they see fit. And now I'm going to launch that same application, now delivered by a Microsoft AppV. So this is now a streaming technology, normally a technology that has isolated registry, isolated file system, but we can see there that the personalization has been injected into that user session. Still got the black background, we've still got the custom dictionary set to French West Indies. So here for the user experience is high because they don't know and they quite frankly don't care how IT are delivering this application or to which operating system they're logging onto. All they know is that the last time they use their application, that user's personalization has persisted. So I'm just going to make a further change here and maybe break that application so it's a bit unusable for the user. Now, one of the problems associated here, as well as AppSense being able to get that user logged onto the desktop in a quick and consistent fashion, we can also help fix problems when things go wrong with the user's application personalization. So here I've made a change. It's great for demo purposes, but my user, it's not very useful if my user wants to start editing a Word document because my user has lost access to all the tabs, etc., that Word has in the application. if I asked 9 out of 10 IT departments how they would fix this problem, dependent on who that end user was, maybe if it was one of the, the MD, the FD, we might send our best guys down to try and fix that profile-related issue. Because typically, the fix for this would be to ask the user to close down all their applications, log off the desktop, and we delete the profile. Now that might fix that profile problem there with that one application, but unfortunately, it fixes it by reverting everything back to its first run settings. And reverting things back to the first run settings now means that my mouse is on my left hand, it's been reverted back to the right-handed mouse. I've lost all my MK2 file within Outlook, so now it doesn't recognize all the email addresses that are sent to people in the past. And that's not good because that's a poor user experience. They're probably going to spend the rest of the day trying to get back to where they were, and obviously there's going to be a lot of lost settings. We have a number of ways that we can fix this with AppSense, and the one that I'm going to show you today is how we can actually give that power down to the end user. So my end user is still logged on this desktop. I'm not going to ask them to log off, and my user is going to access the AppSense self-service portal. So here within the self-service portal, my user can see all the applications that AppSense is capturing the personalization for. And this is just the user. So this is very much a simplified web console, which shows the user the applications that the user has used last, and my user can select the Microsoft Office group of apps. We can click Next, and what my user now sees is that as well as AppSense being able to capture the user's personalization on a per application or a per application group basis, we're also able to take snapshots or backups of that user's personalization. Within this window, my user has a number of options. They can reset those settings. So very much doing almost like deleting the profile settings just for that one application, so starting from fresh. But more importantly and more useful here, my user can actually roll back their settings to a last known good configuration. So here my user can roll back to a date, so I'm going to roll back to yesterday's personalization, click OK, and then within a few clicks, without even a phone call to IT support, my user can launch that same application again, and all the personalization has been rolled back to a last known good configuration, to yesterday's settings, all whilst, more importantly, preserving the personalization for all their other applications. So here my user didn't have to log off, they didn't have any downtime, there wasn't even a phone call to support. So the cost of this fix has been reduced from a second line, third line support call, maybe passed down to first line, because we can also pass this control to a first line support person so they can fix these problems on behalf of the user. But we can even shift that cost left one more time, pass it down to the end user to reduce that so there's not even a support call in the first place. So what we've just looked at there is how we can manage the user's personalization and also keep that logon experience consistent for that user, consistently quick logon, but also better managing that user's personalization across these complex environments, across these different operating systems, the different technologies, the different devices, the different types of applications that are accessing this user's data, with the ability for the user to roll back their settings if anything goes wrong. What I'm going to look at now is how we can assist in the privilege management. And when we start thinking about privilege management, we think of administrative privileges, users that have got local admin rights. And why have they got admin rights in the first place? We've got users out there that have got too many privileges that we want to take away from the user, because the user has more privileges, they can actually break that build a lot quicker. So it goes back to IT for a fix because a user's done something and broken that device. We can then look at the flip side when we've got a user that doesn't have enough privileges. The user doesn't have enough privileges to do their job. They can't launch these problem applications that require rights to the wrong area of the file system or the registry, or they can't change a certain area of the control panel. Here I'm going to demonstrate that. So this is my standard user. Pretend this is a laptop, and my user goes overseas a number of times and they want to simply just change the date and time to the local time. If my user tries to click on that area of the control panel, we're prompted immediately for some admin credentials. So I can't do that unless I've got local admin rights. There may also be an application, and let's pretend this is a business application called Enlight. This is something my user needs to access to do their job, but unfortunately, again, this application requires elevated privileges for that user to access that application. Now, rather than actually giving the user admin privileges, we can just enable the AppSense products. So here I'm going to enable this as an administrator. This isn't my user enabling the software. I've basically switched this off remotely. But now that same standard user, I've now enabled the AppSense technology. My user goes to access the area of the control panel, whereas before, previously, they didn't have access to that area. We now have access, and the user can change the date and time as they like. Excuse me. Also, the application, which before didn't fire up without any, without the UAC prompt, that application is fully accessible to the user. Now, one thing to understand here, that there's no point my user is given admin privileges. AppSense is managing the applications that are firing up. We're applying the correct privileges to those applications and passing that secure user token or modified user token to those apps. To prove that, if I go and try and do something else that we've not created an AppSense configuration for, so maybe my user wants to go and defragment their hard drive, because there's no AppSense configuration to elevate that area of the control panel, the user is just treated as a standard user. So here the user is able to do their job without breaking that device or bypassing any other areas of the security. Now, one other thing to understand here is, how do IT know why those users were given administrative privileges in the first place? It may have been a traditional thing that the user was an admin previously, but now going into the new Windows 7 desktop, we're taking away those admin rights. But which applications out there require the elevated privileges? Which area of the control panels requires elevated privileges? Well, one of the great features with the AppSense technology is you can actually turn our product into a discovery mode. So we leave the users for administrators for the time being. When those applications and areas of the control panel are firing up and making administrative calls to the operating system, our technology is capturing those applications and control panel applets and sending them back to IT so they can be discovered within the console. Here is a quick example of what we can do. We can actually, of the discovered elements. So we can see that going into the system required elevated privileges, device manager, services, etc. But we don't actually want to allow the users to do that in their new desktop. So what we can do here is we can identify that the date and time was something that we wanted the users to be able to modify, and the Enlight application was the application that we want the users to be able to run. So from this discovery area, we can actually build a configuration. So we can add these executables, we can add these files, these areas of the control panel to an AppSense configuration, push those down to the endpoints before we take away those admin privileges from the users, so the user's experience isn't degraded at any point. We take away those admin rights, the users can launch that business application that they require to do their day-to-day job. They can make the modifications to the areas of the control panel that the IT have elevated the privileges to, all whilst keeping that desktop maintained and managed by IT. So that was a quick rundown of what we can do within privilege management. What I'm now going to look at is how we can, is all about data access. Just going to log on to this desktop as a user, and now think of this desktop as being a user's corporate laptop. So on this corporate laptop, when my user is connected to the domain, they have access to their data. And when we're talking about users' data, we're talking about their documents. And my user has a workflow. You know, they're used to finding their documents sat on their H drive, and they know it when they actually create a document. So I'm going to create a document. So I'm going to create a document now. My user also has a workflow, which means that when they save the document, they're quite happy to just hit save, and they know it's going to save directly back to their home drive. So if I want to access that document whilst I'm online, it's easy enough just to go back into my home drive, and there we go, we can see that document. So there's no surprise there. But the challenge that the users and IT face is, how do I now get access to my corporate data on all my other devices that I now have? How do I have access to them offline as well? That's another challenge. Well, IT may provide the user with a number of solutions. One of the solutions may be to give the user the ability to connect in via a VPN session when they're not connected to the corporate LAN. But the problems associated to that is maybe the user doesn't have their VPN token, maybe they've lost it, maybe there's no software available for their device that they want to connect in with. Do we have the Checkpoint software for the iPad, for the Android device, or for the Mac? So when these solutions aren't suitable, this is when the user starts to try and find their own way of getting around or getting their access to their documents on multiple devices and getting them offline. That might be doing things such as sending themselves an email from their corporate email account to their personal email account. It might be using USB sticks, USB drives. It may also be trying to utilize these free third-party cloud sync solutions that gives that user the ability to synchronize their data everywhere to all their different types of devices. But then what happens about legislation? What happens about security? Who owns this data now that the user has synchronized that data into the cloud? So these are the challenges that IT face. We want to give the user that synchronized everywhere feel, but maintaining a level of security, maintaining a level of policy. This is where AppSense Data Now product comes in. If I go to my second desktop, this is now not a corporately owned desktop. This is my user's personal desktop. Because it's a personal machine, it's not been added to the domain, the user doesn't have access to their home drive as they do in the corporate environment on that corporately owned device. But what my user does have access to is the Data Now client. If I go and open up my Data Now client and access the home drive, we can see a visual representation of what documents my user has on their home drive. And what we can see here is we've got the Rise of the Device document is available on this endpoint. And what I'll do, I'll just let's put the time in there, 10:31, click Save. So the user has modified the document, close that document down, then maybe the next day they're back in the office again, and back to their original workflow, go into their home drive, double click on the document, and we can see that those edits have taken place. So we've got that synchronized feel, or that synchronized feature between these two different devices. And one of them is a corporate, one of them is personally owned, and these are two Windows devices, but we also stretch out into other types of, the client is available on different devices as well, so it's not just available on a Windows client. We have clients for the Mac client, for iOS, and also for Android. Now the main difference here, I'll show you how the client looks on the iOS device shortly, but I just want to highlight one of the main differences between Data Now and those sync everywhere type cloud-based products out there. And that's the fact that you've spent a lot of time, money, and investment into your current storage area, so into your data centers, into your file servers. With the AppSense Data Now product, you don't need to move your data from where it currently sits. You don't have to go through a migration project to move all your data into a different storage area, or never mind into the cloud. Your data remains exactly where it is. All you need to do with regards to infrastructure is download the AppSense virtual appliance, the Data Now virtual appliance, which is available in all the different types of virtualization flavors. Make some small configuration changes, and then we give you secure access from the clients directly into your storage areas. So the appliance will probably sit within your DMZ, an on-premise appliance, along with the on-premise storage. So what I'm going to do now is quickly give you a demonstration of the types of policy that we can apply during the access of the data. So I'm going to jump into the web console for the Data Now appliance. So here we've jumped into the web console, so after making a few small number of configuration changes, you can now then configure DataNow through this web console. The first area of configuration I'm going to show you quickly is that I've talked about giving users access to their home drive. But we appreciate users have got data in different storage areas. They've got their own personal home drive where they've got their My Documents, but maybe they've also got a departmental share where everybody in their department has access to common documents, common data. And this is something that we can add with AppSense. It's not just access to the user's home drive. We can add new map points where users can access things such as SMB shares, etc. If I just jump back out here and show you that on the actual endpoint, you saw before that when I went into the DataNow appliance, I had access to the home drive, so that's my user's personal home drive, but we've also got access to this common area. So a common area of shared data where users can actually collaborate on data. Going back into the console, just a touch on some of the types of policies that we can apply. If we look at the global policies, we can actually start to add some platform restrictions. So do we want the users to be able to access their DataNow data via certain operating systems? You can see here the supported ones. We've got Windows, the Apple OSs, both the iOS and Android, and also a web client. So if you do have Linux device out there that have got web access, you can also access DataNow as well. We can limit access based on logon restrictions. Do we want to do anything if there's any inactivity? As you can see there, we can actually do remote wipes. And how do we want to manage any failed login attempts? If we think of more of the mobile application, again, I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to bring my iPad out shortly and connect in so you can actually see how the iOS client looks and the functionality within there. You know, do we want to ask the user to re-authenticate after such amount of period of inactivity? Do we want the user to be able to print from the application? Do we want the user to be able to copy and paste from data from the application into other apps? And this is more specifically on the mobile devices. File uploads, so we can have on the mobile devices users uploading data into the DataNow application. And what do we want to do if the device has been compromised? So what do we want to do if we see that it's a jailbroken or rooted device? As I said previously, we can also do things such as do a remote wipe. So we can actually, if the user leaves the organization or if the device is lost, etc., we can push down a wipe signal, and that will just wipe away the user's local data. Wipe away the DataNow cache. It's not going to affect any other data on that device. It's not a full device wipe. It's just deleting the data in the DataNow cache. So let's just show you how that looks on my iPad. I'm going to bring up the DataNow client on my iPad. Bear with me a second. You should shortly see my device on screen. There we go. So this is the iOS client. When my user first accesses it, we've got the different storage areas. Because we appreciate that users have corporate data, but the users may also have personal data that they want to have access to. So DataNow is very much a window to the user's data wherever that data sits. Corporate data where IT can apply a corporate policy, but then they've also got their personal storage areas, and we can add different types of storage provider there. You can see we've got the DataNow, the corporate user data, but we can add things such as Skype Drive, Google Drive, ShareFile, and also a WebDAV connection as well. Well, here I'm actually connecting into the AppSense. This is my AppSense corporate data now, so this is actually pointing back to the file servers at AppSense HQ. And here we can see that we've got the shared documents. So we've got the core sales documents, which everybody in the sales team at AppSense has access to. But then I've also got my own home drive. So here, this is a connection back to AppSense HQ right now. And I'm going into my documents. I can go into my AppSense folder here, and just for this demonstration, maybe I can access my Microsoft device-based license white paper that we have with AppSense. So you can see here that the user has got very quick access to their corporate data without the requirements of shifting that data into the cloud. The data has remained exactly where it was previously, but using the Data Now appliance, these types of devices, users can have access to their corporate data whilst IT apply a policy to them on a multitude of different devices. So that's how we talk about, this is what everything I've talked about there is to do with giving users access to their corporate data. But we also want to think about these types of mobile devices that I'm logged onto at the moment. How do we now start to manage these devices? Because this obviously isn't a Windows device anymore. How do IT start to enforce policies onto the corporate apps and the corporate data that users are now requesting access to? And first of all, I'm going to touch on there's two different types of scenario here, because this device that I've connected to could be a corporately owned device. It could be something which IT have issued out to a number of the users, or it could be a personally owned device. Now, being a personally owned device, I've got a little bit more of reservations if IT wants to start putting a full MDM type solution around my personally owned device. And the MDM solution is a mobile device management solution where IT wrap a policy around the whole of my iPad or the whole of my Android device. That's a problem to me because IT have the ability to do a full remote wipe of my device. They may know where the device is with tracking information, etc. And I'm not happy with that because it's a personally owned device. Now, if it was a corporately owned device, then there's no problem with that because IT own the device, IT can wrap a full MDM policy around there. But when it's a personally owned device, IT want to give the user access to corporate applications on that device. Those corporate applications are going to be communicating with corporate data. And that's all IT really need to be wrapping a policy around. And that'd be great when we can actually wrap a policy around just the application and just the data and leave the rest of that personally owned device, including the personal applications, the personal data, the personal photos, etc., leave those intact and unmanaged. And that's what we can achieve with Mobile Now. If we first look at a standard application, applications that users have been downloading, delivering to this desktop, personal applications such as Evernote, my IT department can't apply any policy to these applications, and to be fair, I don't expect them to. But now what we can use with Mobile Now is we can give IT the ability to apply policy to corporately owned and corporately delivered applications. So how do we deliver those applications to these mobile devices? Well, we do that with the Mobile Now products. Here, if I go into just a container, this is not a container similar to other mobile device management technologies out there. I've just simply dragged my application icons and grouped them together here. If I go into Mobile Now, think of this Mobile Now application as being the corporate app store. My user has been given access to a number of applications which IT will deliver to this user's endpoint. And the user here has a number of options, and my user, thinking of user experience again, if I wanted to download an application, so I might want to download Yammer, if I click on Yammer, you'll see now that we're not pulling this down from the App Store. This is now being delivered via a corporate tenant. And this, in this case, this is my own personal tenant, so ones that the pre-sales are provided with for demo purposes. But this could be your own corporate tenant, where you're delivering corporate applications down to your users' endpoints. I won't install that just now, but just to show you some of the elements of policy that IT can actually deliver to these corporately secure applications, I'm going to open up my Office Squared app. So the first thing that we will notice, because this is a corporately delivered application, the first bit of policy that we're going to apply is asking the user for a PIN. So here my user has to put in a PIN before they have access to this corporate application. So that obviously distinguishes between personal apps and corporate applications. We can ask for a PIN to start. Another thing which is important when users are opening up applications in these secure opening up documents and data, etc., in these secure applications, is now that we want to make sure that there's no data leakage. So just to demonstrate how we can manage certain data leakage, I've got a document here which is opened in this secure encrypted application which has been delivered via IT. If my user now tries to take or copy, I'm going to select all here and copy this bit of data. Just to show that we actually have copied that to the clipboard, if I paste it, we can see that data leakage is copied and pasted there within that secure application. If I now move away from that secure app and go to just a personal application, and I try and paste that information out of there, we see that we're not actually copying that data from the secure application. That policy managed application has its own clipboard, and there's a separate personal clipboard to prevent any of that data leakage. So, shown you a couple of elements of policy there, but let's go and actually take a look into the AppSense, into the mobile tenant that my device is connected to. So if I just jump out of here quickly and go back to my desktop, I'm actually logged into my mobile now tenant. So this is the tenant that my device is connected to. And what I'm going to show you first of all is how we get these applications onto the tenant to deliver to the user's endpoint, and how quickly and easy it is to wrap these applications using Mobile Now technology. So let me just log back into here. So logging into my tenant, and you can see this is all SaaS based. So logging into my mobile tenant now, first area that I've come to is the app catalog. So these are all the applications that my IT department can make available to the users. So what I'm going to do first of all is show you how simple and easy it is to wrap an application. The devices that we're supporting is iOS and Android devices at the moment. So when I go to upload an application, we can choose either an APK or the IPA file for an iOS device, and I'm simply going to upload one of our apps, the DataNow IPA. Clicking on upload, this is when the wrapping process takes place. So we don't need any complex method of modifying an application, utilizing an SDK, etc. We're simply uploading this IPA or the APK file into the Mobile Now tenant, and now you can see there that the verifying process is taking place. So that'll probably take a minute or so whilst the wrapping process is taking place. But you'll see shortly, I will soon actually make that application available to my device and deliver it within minutes. Whilst we're waiting for that to occur, let's take a look at the types of policies that we can apply. If we start by looking at the device policies, so these are probably the policies that you'd want to enforce if it was a corporately owned device. But also you may want to apply a level of this to certain user devices as well. So things we can do, we can remove the functionality or remove some of the features. So one of the things that you'll see in my demonstration is that I've actually removed the FaceTime functionality from this device. You'll actually see that come back up shortly. But you may also want to stop users from doing things such as allowing screen capture, stopping the use of the camera. If we start looking at the other features such as the cloud, what do we want to do do we want to allow users to utilize the cloud, the iCloud? Obviously that's specifically for iOS. But what about the native applications? Do we want to stop things such as the native browser from remove the native browser and force the user to use the secure browser which is delivered via Mobile Now? How do we want the device to be, the user to authenticate onto the device? Is a simple passcode enough, or do we want to have a minimum passcode length and start to add some complex characters in there, etc.? So they're all on quite a comprehensive amount of policy that we can apply to the device. But as we said, if that's not a corporately owned device and it's a personally owned device, a user-owned, a bring your own device type scenario, then we don't really need to apply a device policy. We just want to, IT just wants to apply a policy to the applications and the data that those applications are communicating with. And this is where the app policies come in. So a much more granular approach to applying policy to the applications. Here, if we can look at the health type policies, so do we want those apps to run if the device has been compromised or jailbroken? Do we want a minimum level of operating system version? Authentication for those business apps. Do we want a minimum password length, max password? Do we want them to allow single sign-on, etc.? Do we want those applications to be able to function offline? So in the type of scenario there where we could have only allow the applications to run online, if the device was stolen and the user or the person who stole it took out disabled the Wi-Fi, took out the SIM card, those apps won't run. So the user won't be able to have access to that corporate data and the corporate application. If they did go back online, obviously we would have a white policy to deprovision that device the next time that became online anyway. We've also got the ability to have geolocation restrictions. So do we want a specific application to be able to run if the user isn't in a geographical location? So that's great in the healthcare environment. So maybe we've got a healthcare clinical application that we only want the clinicians to use when they're on campus. If the users move off campus, the geolocation policy kicks in and that application becomes unusable. We also think of the data. All the data and the applications that we're managing with Mobile Now is fully encrypted with the AppSense 256-bit encryption. We can also manage how the data copies in and out. So you saw before that to prevent data leakage, we're keeping the data copy between only business applications, but we don't mind the users being able to paste data from the personally owned application into the corporately owned environment. So just going back now, so a quick run through there of what we can do policy-wise. We can see now that if I go back to the application and the apps catalog, with that application I uploaded only minutes ago is now available. If I click on there and just make that feature in a group, so I'm now making it available to my user. If I jump back onto my iOS device, my iPad, and again share my screen. So if I go back and share my screen, so let's see. Bring my screen back up here. If I go back into the Mobile Now application, what we should see is the new app which is now made available to this user. So we see there's a new little icon in the top corner, and within a few minutes I was able to upload, I was able to wrap that application, and now my user has access to that application within a few minutes of just going through this demonstration. Now, I'm not going to download this app, but what I'm going to do is finish off the demonstration by deprovisioning this device. So if I just cancel that and go back to my tenant, let's just pretend that this user has left the organization and this was a personally owned device. And what I'm going to do is actually deprovision this device. So I'm going to deprovision my iPad. And what I'm going to do is just shortly see the user applications, the corporate applications start to disappear from this user's device when that policy applies. So over the air I've just kicked in to ask that to deprovision the device. So within a few seconds, there we go, we can actually see that Mobile Now has deprovisioned the device. Not only that, we've removed the policy from that personally owned machine there, and we've actually taken away that MDM policy which was removing the FaceTime feature from that native application. So now that user's device is still intact. We've not modified any of the user's personal apps, not touched their personal data. IT was successfully able to manage just the corporate applications and the corporate data that was being delivered to that personally owned device. Obviously, as I mentioned before, if it was a corporately owned device, we could add in the functionality and the functionality to start to apply that MDM type policy, and we could wipe that device if we wanted to. So there are two different scenarios that can be managed by Mobile Now. So that's pretty much it for the demonstration. Just to kind of finish off there, just a bit of a reminder of what I've shown you today. It's all about talking about managing, and I'll flick back one more slide, managing the user's devices, the applications, and the data. So applying that single layer of policy whilst maintaining a high level of user experience, utilising the 3 products with AppSense. The Desktop Now product is all about context-aware policy. There's the privilege management, so elevating the applications and the areas of the control panel, keeping that user as a standard user. Log-on optimization, making sure that that user has access to their desktop quickly and consistently quick. Throwing in the user profile management as well there, so they've got that consistency across these complex desktop environments and desktop delivery mechanisms and application delivery mechanisms that exist in our enterprises today. The Data Now product is giving the user access to all their data from any type of device. IT can enforce a granular control by applying a policy to this. And one of the main important points is it's in your existing data storage. There's no migration of data to the cloud. There's no problem with changes to the security or legislation because your data remains exactly where it is. And finally, I gave you a quick demonstration there of the Mobile Now product. The mobile device management and the more granular mobile application management, applying this fine-grained application and comprehensive policy control to these types of devices. And one of the things I didn't get a chance to show you is the policy we can actually apply to both the native and third-party email as well. And important part at the top, the rapid 100% over-the-air SaaS-based delivery. It's very simple to upload and wrap an application. You can have your applications delivered to these endpoints in no time. So very, very rapid, very, the next generation of mobile device management. So I think we've probably got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to take this opportunity now to just have a look through the questions. So if you bear with me a second, I'm just going to have a look through the questions now. First one is just can I confirm if the slides are available for download? We'll make sure that the slides are available to everybody at the end of the session. One of the questions is, does the log-on speed increase exponentially with the growing size of the user's profile? The answer to that is no. Apologies if I didn't actually stress that earlier. One of the great benefits of applying the user's personalization on demand is that we only apply personalization to the application as and when the application launches. So if we think of the Office products, let's say IT wanted to manage the Office products, Internet Explorer, and maybe Adobe Reader, none of that personalization for those applications is loaded when the user logs onto the desktop. The only things that we load when the user logs on with regards to personalization is what we class as the desktop personalization. So that was the changing of the keyboard, the mouse settings, the accessibility options. And what we tend to find is that these remain a small number of registry keys, so typically about 100 kilobytes in size. So that's all that we load at logon and all that we save at logoff. So that's how we keep the user logon experience sub 20 seconds now and sub 20 seconds continuously. It doesn't matter how many other applications we choose to personalize because they only load when the user is logged into that session. Looking a little bit further, bear with me a second here while I'm reading through these questions and trying to answer them at the same time. Someone has asked if the privilege management product is a standalone product or does it have to be purchased or installed with the wider AppSense suite. The answer to that is yes, it is a standalone product. It's a feature of one of our standalone products. We have a product called Application Manager, which is one of the products within the Desktop Now suite. We have Application Manager, but there's also a privilege management version of the product. If you're just looking for privilege management features, it's something which we can actually do as its own product. So please get into. We'll pass those details over to you, Jerome. Thank you. Looking through, I think we've actually got. Let me just check to make sure I've not missed any questions here. One of the questions there is how can I block copying corporate data to local drives or Dropbox, for example, on private devices? Well, one of the things, just for your understanding, we actually have full 256-bit encryption on the mobile devices. So the corporate data from DataNow, which is stored on the mobile devices, is fully encrypted. And that's not utilizing the iOS encryption, that's our own AppSense encryption. So if it was compromised, that data is useless, basically. Now, on the other devices, such as the Mac devices and the Windows devices, we can actually, within the policy, allow specific devices to have access to the corporate data. So if I switch back to my console quickly, if I go into the DataNow admin console and I'll log in here, one of the areas that I showed you previously in the policy area is the different types of devices that we can allow access to. So we can actually apply a policy to allow only verified devices to connect in. So just because a user has the credentials to log in doesn't necessarily mean that they can have access to their corporate data on any personal device, let's say. We can actually allow the user to request authentication, and then once the IT department allow that device to connect in, then that device will have access to the cache. Hopefully that's answered the question. If not, please feel free to ask the question again, or send me an email, and I'll try and answer it a little bit better. Looks like I've gone through all of the questions on the list. If I have missed anyone out, or if there are any other questions that you think of at a later point, please feel free to send me an email. I'll bring my email address back up. So my email address is tom.skase@appsense.com. Apologies for jumping through backwards here. If there are any other questions, then please let me know. But other than that, thank you very much for joining me today. It looks like we're coming up to the hour, so we timed this very well. Thanks for joining me today. Hope you all have a very good day. Thank you.